Hi, this is Catherine. This is Taking Tea with Catherine. This is Sleepy Time Tea. One of my favorites, a classic. And I have it in this lovely panda mug. It's a tea mug, you know what I mean? I like mugs in general, but I like the shape of this because it just, I don't know, there's something about it for tea. Anyway, pandas are one of my favorite, pandas, not pandas. Pandas are one of my favorite animals ever after the cat family, and ducks. But I decided to use this one just because I was in the mood for it. Also because I saw a documentary about pandas the other day, and it was just so good. But anyway, so yeah, that's what I've been watching recently. But I thought I'd talk about a little update. We're about to hit the last week of Victober, which means I have so much to read. Oh my goodness. Unless there's an absolute miracle, I have a couple days off, but I don't see myself actually reading all the books I plan to read in its completion in this month. I'm not going to stress it, but I would really like to get as far as possible. I have finished 3 books this month so far, and all of them I finished this past week. Like, I was reading them. I was reading all these books since the beginning of October and beforehand, and finally actually finished some, which was a relief. The problem with starting a lot of long books is that it does take longer to finish everything, but I am making some progress. One of the things I did, I took a lot of walks this past week, a lot of nice long walks. I ended up in a lot of parks, different parks, some near me and some when I was in the city, and decided to read then, and whatever free time I had, not all the free time, but a lot of the free time I had when I wasn't watching panda documentaries, I tried to read as much as I could. And I think, I feel good about it. And so I think if I keep it up, then I could finish at least 1 or 2 more books by next week. Just a little update on my cat, in case you hear her. I have her not in this room because she's so loud, but I've talked about Janie for the longest time, and you've heard her howling on this video for so long. So one of the days off I have is a day where I'm taking her to finally be spayed. And when I say that, it has been a pain. I have no need to have a cat that can bear children because I have no way of taking care of that situation. When she went missing for a month, it was scary, but thankfully she's okay. But she's been going into heat every other week, which means howling and spraying on things disgustingly, and just walking around and just bumping into everything, like, affectionately. And it is so irritating. And I feel bad for her too, because I imagine it's frustrating. So one of the days I take off might be a little wrapped up in that, but I will try to fit in reading anyway, and it will be a relief. Hopefully this will be a very successful operation. It'll be a relief when it's over, because the noise, it has been really hard being at home so much and having to hear this so much. I think anyone will go crazy. But anyway, let's move on from that. Let's talk about the books I read. So the first book I actually finished was not a book. I decided to read it in Victober, but it's not a Victorian novel, and it wasn't any of the prompts, but it was about Victorian novels. So Dickens' Fur Coat and Charlotte's Unanswered Letters, the rows and romances of England's great Victorian novelists by Daniel Poole. It's a very long title, but it was really good. I would say a lot of the biographical bits I knew generally about, because I've read a bit about Dickens. I could read more. I have a biography on him that I'm not here, that I want to read. I have a biography on Trollope I want to read. I have a biography on Wilkie Collins that I want to read, and probably, and the Brontes. So it's been pretty well covered that even though I haven't read the entire novels I want to read, I do have a general knowledge, and I have read a little bit about Gaskell as well. So I knew most of what I had read about their biographical information. But the actual timeline of the life of the Victorian novel, as it were, was something I only knew a little bit about. And like I knew a little bit about the kind of like the way they released things in three volumes, and they also did the serializations. I knew some of that, but I didn't know the exact timing of when they were doing these things and when it started to fall out of popularity. I didn't know about Moody's Lending Library, even though I'd seen it referred to in certain books. It was referred to in one of Trollope's books, at least. And other, all the publishers and the booksellers. There are some publishers that I've heard of even now, like Macmillan. But it, and then there was one that had a publishing company that held over and was still going, that had been Jane Austen's publisher. So it was kind of stuff that I didn't know everything about. So I'm glad that I read it, and it was interesting because, of course, it was. The writers that I'm so wrapped up in right now and learning about them. Thackeray featured a lot in there too, who I don't know that much about, but it was good to actually, in context, it was good to learn about him in this situation. So yeah, it was fascinating. I would say anyone who is an expert on Victorian novels, who've read all the biographies, who have read a lot more about this, might find this repetitive, but it's a good start, I would say, and I think it would whet your appetite to learn more about people and the times, etc. So definitely a good companion to Victober. So I would say if you didn't read something like, if you have or have access to this book and you didn't read it this month, maybe try to read it in November, for Nonfiction November, because it could be a good follow-up. Or maybe read it next September before Victober. Something. Maybe. Like, it didn't blow me away, but it was actually really good, if that makes sense. So, very importantly, this is a milestone for me because everybody and their mother tells me, oh, I can't believe you've never read this. So now I can say, yes, I have read it. I haven't just seen adaptations, and I haven't just read the graphic novel, which I had before, but I read Jane Eyre from start to finish, and I liked it, and it was quite the page turner. It did overtake anything else I was reading at the time, because of the nature of the book. I wish I would have read this when I was younger. I do think that it might have been a favorite had I started. And I'd still say, I think, if I was going to do, and I would have to think it through, if I were going to do a top 10 favorite Victorian novels, I'd probably pick this one. I don't know where it would hit, but it would be in the top 10. I don't think it would be in the top 5. So it's hard to explain because it was really good, and I know everybody's looking at me like, did you like it? Did you like it? And I did, but I don't think I have the fervor that a lot of people have. I do have a lot to say about it. I did think that the concept was interesting. Yeah, of course I could talk about it forever. And I want to read The Wide Sargasso Sea, which is not written by Charlotte Bronte, but it's kind of like a prequel that someone else wrote, because of reasons. And I don't know how much I could say without having spoilers, but the problem is that I think most people know already about what happens in this book. It's very popular, it's very well known. So it's like, do I say or do I not say? Because unlike me, most people, if they were reading Victorian novels, that's probably one of the first ones they read. And I would say that I liked Jane Eyre as a character very much. I liked her strength. I liked the way she dealt with things. I liked the way she stood up for herself very often. And I do also like the way she had morals, if that makes sense. Like she wasn't about to compromise her morals. I'm not saying that she didn't make mistakes and that some of her thoughts weren't quite right, but I did like that the time she was living in, if she would have compromised, she would have been in a situation that socially would have been horrible for her. So she was very protective of herself, and I thought that was good, But I also think that she went through a time where she made some choices that were like, she did not think things through. And I was like, man, how could you put yourself in that situation where you're basically almost dying? I'm not going to say what happened in case you didn't read it, but I will say this. It's still kind of hot. Many years ago, I had to go through job training. I was about 20 years old, so just slightly over Jane's age. And I was a very young 20-year-old. I had to go somewhere where I had to take a bus from Port Authority to another part of New York. Not too far away, but just far away enough that you can't just hail a taxi all the time. And it was in January. It was very cold. I had my luggage with me. It was dark out. And I couldn't get a taxi. Usually I could. because I had to go for a few weeks of this training. I'd go back every weekend. You'll need to know that. And I have terrible sense of direction, but there was where I was trying to make a phone call. There were no cell phones for me at the time. Very different time. No Uber, you know? And there was a bar nearby where there was a lot of loud noise coming out of it, and it sounded like a fight, and I just freaked out because I was trying to call information on the payphone for a cab, and I freaked out and decided to walk to my hotel where I was going to stay for the week for the training, and I walked on a highway in the dark, in the freezing cold, with my luggage, a female of small proportions, and I made it to my, the hotel. I made it in one piece, somehow, in health, and I called my dad when I got there, and he was like, what? When I told him what I did, because it was so reckless and so not thought through. It was just like one of these panic moves that I made in my life. And as someone who is now old enough to be a mother to someone of that age, I look and I say, that would freak me out if my daughter or my niece or anyone did that. And so when I was looking at Jane Eyre and scoffing at certain things she did at some crisis point, I thought of that moment later on and said, you know what? Sometimes we do things that are dramatically stupid, and we just have to be thankful we made it through it and never do something that's stupid again. Anyway, so, yeah, that was weird, reckless moments in my life. But I was also thinking about Rochester and not New York. I have been there, but the bronchitis. Anyway, yeah, I had such bronchitis when I went there. Anyway, I'm sure it's a lovely city. But Rochester, the main one of the main characters of Jane Eyre, and I don't know. I don't know how I feel about him. Like I feel like some people look at him as this romantic character. I'm not saying he doesn't do romantic things or say romantic things sometimes, but I don't know. I just never felt it in him. Maybe it's weird how I could feel like that about Mr. Darcy and not about Rochester, but it's a slightly different story. And even though sometimes Rochester made sense in some of his explanations, I just feel like he didn't, this is slightly spoiler-y, by the way, he didn't care for Jane Eyre the way she cared for him. I don't think. I think he loved her, wanted her, but didn't really think about her in this situation. So he didn't handle it very well. And I'm not saying people make mistakes. Obviously, some people walk on highways in a cold January night. But I just feel like I don't want to elevate him. I also don't want to put him down too much either. I mean, he's not Heathcliff, you know what I mean? So I would love to one day rank, men of the novels that I read, like I did with Jane Austen men, but I'm not there yet because there's still so much I have to read. But I was in Barnes & Noble the other day. I have finally returned to Barnes & Noble. I will talk about The Strand actually another day because that's another issue that came up recently. The Strand put out a bit of a we're having some difficulties moment, but I don't want to talk about that right now. I did go to The Strand recently too, so I am supporting places. I bought something in The Strand, so anyway, but I went to Barnes & Noble and had a little browse. It's a little emptier than it used to be. I don't know if that's because they wanted spacing or something, but they still have periodicals. I read somewhere that they were going to stop selling periodicals. That word periodical is funny. But yeah, so anyway, and I saw this from like a mile away because the title is just so us. Oh reader. And so Charlotte Bronte. She uses reader a lot, especially in Jane Eyre. But also if you notice it has a little Rochester, not an ideal husband article in here. And I only just started reading this. I was starting to read it I decided to take a bus home from Manhattan to Queens, and it wasn't a super long ride, but it would have been long enough for me to have read a little more, but I get motion sickness on buses, so that kind of put paid to that. So I only really read one article, and that was that one. And it looks like a pretty good magazine, by the way. It's a magazine about reading, for the love of reading, it says. And $9 is a bit much for me to spend. I mean, if I can go to Book Off and buy almost 9 books for $9. So, because you don't have to pay tax. But, so 8 books. So it does seem kind of, if I keep buying this, or even the subscription amount, I don't think it's reasonable for me to keep buying, but we'll see. There's also one of the contributing writers in here has a name that, I'm going to see if I can find it right here. Sorry, I'm taking a million years. It is so similar to my name that I kind of freaked out. Because I'm like, don't take my name and write with it, but don't be like that, right? The article about Rochester not an ideal husband does not get that far into why Rochester was not an ideal husband. It has moments, but it really kind of compares the author's, the magazine article's writer to her own situation, her own relationship, and then intersperses it with Rochester. It's kind of like that book, The Victorian and the Romantic. It kind of reminded me of that a little bit, but in article form. So, but still good. Still good. I so far would recommend this magazine, at least to give it a shot if you have access to it. I mean, anything that encourages reading, right? Anything about reading we love, right? So anyway, talked enough about that. Let's get back to Victober. Guess what else I finished? I started this last year and loved it. When I say loved it, I liked it very much. But then I hit a part that was just depressing me. And so I just kind of delayed it and started piling up other books instead. But finally, I finished this book, The Tenant of Wildfell Hall by Anne Bronte. So now I've read both of Anne Bronte's novels. Now I can go back to her biography. It may have some further Bronte spoilers, but I could probably do okay with it now because anyway. And I really liked it. The ending, the way the people come together, I would say, was a bit, like tension that didn't need to be there, but the actual story was fascinating, addressing a time where women had to deal with certain things. I mean, I think women nowadays still have to deal with certain things too in this situation, but, bad marriages and what goes into trying to get out of something like that. And so I did think it was really good. There was a moment there with her son that scared me. It's hard to explain, but it scared me. As someone who's not even a mother, it put like the maternal into me. And so I think this was really good, and it was a different feeling to most Bronte books somehow. Both, even Anne or whatever. There's so many books that have governesses in them, and this one wasn't as much like that, I haven't talked about Shirley yet, so maybe that's a slight departure too. But I think it was another thing about Jane Eyre. It's like Jane Eyre was a pretty strong character too, and she did have to deal with men that were just, I don't know, to me, not great options. Both of the men in Jane Eyre. I don't feel like the Brontes are necessarily putting down men altogether, but I do think that there is some sort of encouragement for females as well. I do kind of wish that there were more, not just with Brontes, but more, and I haven't read all the Victorian novels out there, so maybe you can let me know if there's anything like this. More about women who are able to have careers, if that makes sense. When I say that, I don't mean women who came into crazy money. I mean people who could run a business. Generally like a teaching business. Like Jane Eyre had that kind of goal for a little bit of running her own school, and I almost kind of wish someone would end up that way. Like it doesn't always end up with a romantic ending, if that makes sense. So let me know if you guys have read something like that, or if I've forgotten a book maybe that I've read that had that in there. Something, I mean, like Jane Austen herself, I mean, she died young, but I think if she would have lived another 20 years, she would have, we could have been like, for this Victober, I decided to read Jane Austen's last book. Can you imagine? But anyway, she was a real life example of someone who was able to live with her sister and everything, but it was a different situation. It wasn't so much that she had a career, I mean, as a novelist, but that's not like a full-time career, you know what I mean? as it were. I don't know how to explain that. But anyway, but otherwise it was fantastic. Also, I would like to see more examples of people that didn't have a relative that was a clergy in some way, because I know most of the writers had some kind of either married to or were the daughters of clergy, but it would be interesting to see a little less of that sometimes in women novelists, main characters. I know Jane Eyre technically was kind of, well, but her father was, she was just an orphan. Anyway, so let's move on from Jane Eyre, but to another Bronte again. Well, to Charlotte Bronte again, Shirley. As you can see, I have not finished. This has Shirley and the Professor in it, but Shirley's the longer one, and I have not finished it yet. I have not gotten as far as I'd like to, but I imagine that I will get close to finishing it by the time this month is over. But I'm not going to talk about it too much right now, because maybe in a wrap-up I can talk about it a little more. I liked it very much so far. I like it very much so far. I almost like the characters in this book so far, Shirley and Caroline, right? Names are escaping me. Almost more than Jane Eyre and Tenant of Waffle Hall. So far, I've enjoyed them more. So that's great. Not so much the male characters, once again. Not yet, anyway. A lot of clergy everywhere. Clergy and progress and issues with society and progress and stuff, which is fine. So, speaking of which, North and South, I really haven't gotten as far as I wanted to, and I really like it. But again, time. And I like it so far. I like Margaret Hale pretty well enough. Another clergyman, but slightly different situation. And more stuff taking place in the North. So many of these take place in the North, which is okay with me. I haven't gotten far enough. I've just met Mr. Thornton, so that was rather awkward, which I kind of liked. But anyway, I know what happens, but still, I don't know exactly everything that happens. So we'll talk about this again later. I have made a lot of progress, although I could use more, and I will hopefully finish this so I can do a tea and mystery. But the Moonstone, I started it a week or so ago, and it is not, I don't think it's going to be my favorite mystery ever, but it's a good story, and it so far it takes place a lot in like a wealthy woman's home. So far it's the point of view of a butler, and I don't know, maybe he would ruin it, who knows, but I would love to see because I know there's adaptations, I haven't seen any of them, and I don't know if they're any good. Let me know if you've ever seen any, and let me know if it's any good, of any of these, by the way. But I would like to see what Julian Fellowes would do with this, just because so much about the household and the servants and everything, that I think that it could use a little of that Downton Abbey treatment. And I could be wrong. Maybe he would ruin it, but yeah, so far so good. I could see where maybe Conan Doyle might have gotten a little bit of an influence by this story. That and Edgar Allan Poe, but like I see how he could have had the seeds of stories from this story already. The Blue Carbuncle and the Sign of Four, for instance, certain little aspects, and others. Anyway, so the last but not least, I guess, I don't know, is the Letters and Diaries of the Pre-Raphaelites, which I started and I like, but it's not my favorite of the Pre-Raphaelite books. I think because I thought it was just going to be a lot of collections of letters and diary entries, and it has some of that, but a lot of it feels just like a book that just happens to include that for their source material. I don't know what I expected, but I can continue this on if I don't finish this into November, because it's nonfiction. But it has a lot of the paintings that I love, and the colors that I love. Some people think that the colors are too lurid, but I'm like, no, this is beautiful. I don't care. I like a little color in one's life, So we'll see if I can make any progress with that. But I'm more interested in hopefully finishing Shirley and the Moonstone. North and South, I want to, because I really have always wanted to read it. But if I don't, it may become like Tenant of Wildfell Hall, and I'll just read it little by little. And Dombey and Son, remember Dombey and Son? No progress whatsoever. I want to read it so bad, but Not enough time in the day. So that's my progress so far. Man, I'm getting into 25 minutes. I thought it was going to be shorter, but there's just so much to say. So anyway, let me know how far you've gone. And in Victober, if there's anything here that you want to read or have read, etc. If you like talking about Victorian novels, please subscribe. And if you don't like talking about Victorian novels, subscribe anyway, because I'll talk about other things too coming up. So this is Catherine taking tea with Catherine. Have a lovely tea and book-filled day. Goodbye.